Hey, how's it going, everybody? It's Trey here with Animal Activism Mentorship. I am joined by some people around the United States that have been involved in the anti-foie gras campaigns throughout the country, and I'm really excited about the conversation that we're going to have today. We're going to talk about all kinds of stuff surrounding the foie gras industry and why we should target it and how things are going, like the state of the anti-foie gras movement. So here in the discussion, we've got Jeff from Asheville, we've got Lauren from the DC area, we've got Mark from the DC area, and we've got Pete from the Austin, Texas area. All of these folks have been fighting the foie gras industry in their respective cities and outside of their cities some of the time. So we're going to start talking about that. If you want, leave a comment. If you have questions, just leave a comment and we will try to get to it. But until then, we'll kick the conversation off a little bit. Do I have any volunteers to kind of just explain what foie gras is for people that may not know?
Sure.
Go ahead.
Foie gras is the diseased liver of a duck who has been force-fed. It's sold as a delicacy in high-end restaurants. And in the United States, the majority of foie gras comes from one farm. The ducks are basically, they're force-fed repeatedly by having a tube pushed down their throat. I believe it's about 10 inches down their throat. And then they have a mixture generally of air and like ground up corn forced into down their esophaguses. And the result of this is really horrific. They're the undercover investigators at Hudson Valley Foie Gras, which again supplies most of the foie gras in the US, have found ducks with punctured throats from the tube. They found ducks who have died because their organs have ruptured just because they've grown so large. And they've even found ducks who have choked to death on their own vomit. So it really is one of the cruelest foods out there. Even just the fundamental nature of it, the goal is to make their liver expand maybe 8 to 10 times its normal size, really giving them fatty liver disease. And I think it's a product that most people, when they hear about it, they're against.
Yeah, thank you for that summary. It's something I want to bring up too, is that, I've heard people say that foie gras is like a welfare issue, but I don't really think that it is. I'd love to hear, some thoughts from all of you, but for me, I think that any industry that we can get rid of, let's get rid of it. I mean, obviously we'd like to get rid of everything all at once if we could. But I think foie gras is a great step to keep going where we want to go. And not only does it benefit those ducks and geese that are suffering in that industry, but it kind of gives us a chance to figure out how to dismantle one industry and hopefully give us the blueprints to dismantle the next industry however we can. Does anybody have any thoughts about that?
Yeah, it's only a welfarist issue if all of us were fighting for humane foie gras, right? Which there are a few farms. I'm not sure in America, but around the world, I'm sure there are some in America. I can't name them, but there are a few where they claim they're not force fed. They overfeed them and allow them to overfeed on their own. None of us are fighting for that. None of us are protesting, disrupting these restaurants and asking them to bring on a more humane version of foie gras. So I don't think it's a welfarist issue. We're certainly not, fighting for a more humane foie gras. But yeah, as you said, Trey, it's sort of like we use the term low hanging fruit a lot. And, in the aspect of say fur, this is something that's been protested against since the 80s, and even beyond. And it's something that the consumers, sort of get behind, whether they're vegan or not, get behind the idea that fur is vile. And the fur industry is toppling, it's falling apart. And again, low-hanging fruit foie gras, it's a bit more difficult to go to the steakhouse that sells foie gras and protest against the cow flesh that they're selling there and get them to stop selling that. As you said, most people are against foie gras, and especially when they are educated on the process. So, and I think sort of these low-hanging fruits, we can go after them and get the wins that we want right now for the animals, and it sort of sets the precedent for the next item on the list. So once the public is educated on something like, say, foie gras, then they're sort of primed and they're used to being educated on these topics. They recognize it as vile, and then it's easy to go on to the next one and educate them on that as well. And they're more open-minded to it.
Yeah, I agree. For those that have just joined us, leave your questions in the comments if you have any questions, and we'll be answering those throughout. We're going to get to a little bit later on, we're going to get to the victories that some of these folks have achieved in their respective cities and what's been going on. But I want to keep with this thread a little bit more. So like Pete, you were bringing up like being at a steakhouse and protesting foie gras. I think that can be like difficult for a lot of people to go to a place of animal oppression of many different species and say, hey, we're only focusing on this one animal. And we see that in the anti-fur movement as well, when these department stores or so-called luxury fashion stores, they're selling all kinds of products of violence, but the anti-fur activists are there to concentrate on the fur. And here in the anti-foie gras movement, it's the same. I mean, these restaurants are serving up the bodies of dead cows, fishes, and all kinds of different products of violence. So Lauren or Jeff, I haven't heard from either of you, but could you maybe just speak to for those that are not as familiar with pressure campaigning, like the importance and also the strategy behind staying focused on one so-called item throughout this process?
I think in order to make these campaigns accessible to people that aren't vegans, which we're not doing a good job of right now, it's so important that we don't go outside a steakhouse and chant human freedom, animal rights, or any sort of thing that's off our message. On your last question, I was actually going to totally disagree and say that I think foie gras is a welfare campaign. And I think that it's something that the public can get on board with. And I feel like any excuse to damage companies financially is an opportunity that we should take, whether or not we feel that it's a welfare campaign. I think fur is a welfare campaign. I don't know why we're saving furred animals and not, well, why not Angora? You know what I mean? Which is rabbit fur that's pulled out, but it's not considered fur. So I do think that these are welfare campaigns, and I think we're far away from animal liberation. But when we get there, I would like to have a bunch of activists that have cut their teeth on issues that are achievable for them and have grown in an organic way. Because I think we've seen protest movements that will get a ton of people out. There were 75,000 people at the climate march in New York 2 weeks ago. And I don't see a culture strategy or a culture of goal setting or a culture of leadership in that movement. And I think it's really important for people to become leaders and become good strategic organizers on these smaller issues, whether they're welfare or not, or however you would classify them.
Yeah, I think we get a little hung up on the idea of whether or not it's a welfare versus an abolitionist type movement. I mean, I would think that everybody here, the five of us, would classify ourselves as abolitionists. So it's sort of irrelevant as to whether or not the actual campaign, the ultimate goal, of course, is abolition. But if you can get some wins, be they, through a pressure campaign or legislatively, then you're going to have to, do the best you can. So most of the legislative wins that we've gotten have been quote unquote welfare wins. And you could argue as to whether or not they're effective or whether or not they dilute the message of animal liberation. But as Lauren mentioned, they do carry a cost with them to these industries. So, for instance, with foie gras, there's no telling whether or not a business gets rid of foie gras. They may replace it with something equally horrid, like a pigeon or something, or just some kind of pate, a different kind of liver, basically. But it's this low hanging fruit idea. You've got to get the wins where you can. And Trey said something in a previous video that I remember very well when he was talking about these issues, and he talked about these 3 cages basically. So you've got like a cage where there's maybe I should let Trey describe it actually since he did the video, but it stuck in my brain because it was the idea of like if you can actually break a cage and free an animal right here, right now, of course you would do that. You wouldn't say, I'm not going to free this animal right now because there are animals like 60,000 of them over in this high security prison that I can't break into. So you've got to take the wins where you can get them.
I'd also just like to add that in the United States, there isn't really a type of animal treatment in at least the culinary industry that consumers have recognized as being unacceptable. So this is kind of bringing that possibility into the public conscious where, for me, I stopped eating animals after seeing crabs get cooked alive, which I think is an unusually horrific way to kill animals. And but that led me to reject all animal exploitation eventually. And I think that this type of thing, it will raise sort of an inconsistency for people where maybe you're against foie gras, maybe you're even attending anti-foie gras protests. And then at some point you have to say, well, where am I drawing the line? And maybe it is a slippery slope to saying, well, maybe I shouldn't be, cutting animals' throats either. Maybe that's also, cruel beyond what should be allowed.
Yeah, I mean, beyond achieving a victory for these birds and helping them, yeah, I think it's a great gateway drug, so to speak, to animal liberation and changing the way that people think about animals for sure. Whether you want to frame it as welfarist or as abolitionist, I mean, really, I think it can be both. Even if it is a welfare campaign, even if you want to consider that, I mean, it can definitely be rooted in abolition for sure. So yeah, I think, man, this is great. This is a great discussion so far. I'm glad we're doing this. So yeah, let's get into it a little bit. Let's talk about what's going on with foie gras. I would like to start with Pete. I think the campaign in Austin, if I'm correct, the one against Uchi is one of the longest standing currently campaigns. It's been going on. Well, you can just tell us about it, Pete. Tell us what's going on with Uchi and then some of the other things that have been going on in Austin during the time being.
Sure. Yeah, Uchi, God, I think it's over a year now. Yeah. Uchi, when I guess when we were trying to decide where we were going to start in Austin, we kind of wanted to shoot high, and we did so with Uchi. They have Uchi, Uchiko, Uchiba, and then other subsidiaries, and they have locations not just in Austin but in Dallas, Denver, Miami, Houston, LA. They're about to open one up in LA. They just opened up another subsidiary location here in Austin, and they're a large conglomerate. They're owned by a restaurant group called High Hospitality, and they're all over the U.S. I don't think I'm mistaken when I say they're one of the largest retailers of foie gras. And I have some inside sources that have sort of shed some light on how much they make from it on a daily basis and a weekly basis. And they make a killing off of it, pun intended. But yeah, they have not folded. They pretty much, they push back just as hard as we fight. And there are some very violent people that attend those restaurants and work at those restaurants. There was an activist here in Austin a couple weeks ago who was just chalking on one of their public sidewalks, and one of the employees came out and tried to run him over with his vehicle, and then chased him down in his vehicle, and called the police, and they've gotten cars towed, and they call the cops every time. But so we're kind of fed up with dealing with these aggressive and violent types here in Austin. Now, it's not gonna affect every location that they have across the nation, but we've decided to sort of take a different route, and we've met with the city clerk here in Austin to figure out how to exactly get a ballot initiative started so that we can just ban foie gras in its entirety from the city of Austin, which would of course cause Uchiko and Uchi to have to drop it, and all other restaurants to follow. But we've continued on with other restaurants. We've had some great success. We've had one other that is just as hard-headed as Uchi. They've been in the game for almost 30 years, and they've been protested, the owner claims, for over 20 years. And so it's just an ego thing. I don't think they don't sell much of it. It's just an ego thing. But we'll continue on. We have a new foie gras target that we're going to visit next week. And since we shot so high with Uchi, and it just became so daunting and everlasting, we're now being a little bit more critical in the way that we pick targets. All right, we try to pick restaurants that are coupled with a hotel or with another business, so we can hit secondary or tertiary targeting all in the same night. And this one coming up, checks all those boxes as well. So, they can play hardball, and the other ones that we will approach in the near future, they don't want to drop it. They can hold out, but they could save themselves a headache and save themselves from losing profits, and just drop it now and be the good guys, be the ones that are talked about in this city as having some compassion, before it's inevitably taken away from them as a choice anyways, once we get the ballot initiative in place.
First of all, I want to say that I'm sorry that happened about, somebody almost getting run over, but this is something that maybe isn't talked about enough in the activism community, is like keeping each other safe, because you never know what's going to happen out there. People, we're doing something that a lot of people have never thought about and don't understand, and they get pissed off about it, and they don't know how to react. This can go for cops, this can go for employees, this can go for higher ups, just passersby, people dining at the restaurant, or patronizing whatever business you're protesting, or whatever the case may be. We've got to keep each other safe out there. I'm sorry that was something that happened. As far as picking targets goes, yeah, I totally get that. I think the important part is just never giving up. Even if the campaign slows down a little bit, just to keep it going. I remember in the anti-fur movement, when Saks was the big target, and everybody kind of figured like, oh, it's going to take them 5 years to go for free or something, so we got to run these other smaller campaigns in the foreground while we run the Saks campaign in the background, try to get them to go for free. And that's what happened, but also Saks went for free way before anybody ever thought, which was amazing. So keep up the great work y'all are doing with the Uchi campaign. And before we move on, tell us about some of the victories that have been going on in Austin.
So I won't name any names, but the victories, like I said, they've been coupled with hotels. That's been the easiest wins. There's another one that's on the radar. There's two restaurants under one roof, essentially, and they both sell foie gras. So that's another, a target and a secondary target. But the locations downtown, the unnamed locations downtown, the ones that are coupled with hotels, I mean, it's just so much easier to get a win, because you're essentially, like, these restaurants don't have security of their own, or people out on the sidewalks greeting people as they walk in necessarily, but the hotels, these 5-star hotels, do, and they respond immediately. And then we have a chance to not talk to this restaurant owner who feels personally attacked, but we can talk to the representatives of this larger business, this hotel, and they get the message right to the bosses. And then the owner of the restaurant doesn't have a say. They have to follow suit. So I mean, we all know that using secondary and even tertiary targeting is super beneficial. So if you can do it on step one, why not do so? If there's anything specific you want me to cover.
No, I think that's great. I mean, it sounds like restaurants that are connected to hotels, when they're selling foie gras, I mean, it creates a vulnerability, because not only, if you do a protest, not only are you bothering the people at the restaurant, but now you're bothering the hotel. And the restaurant, I guess maybe in some situations the restaurant might be owned by the hotel, and in other instances the restaurant is just kind of placed inside the hotel. And in either situation, pissing off or annoying the guests at the hotel, I mean, that's a big deal. I remember in Chicago a couple of years ago, when Millennium Hotels was still sponsoring the Iditarod, we did a giant disruption in that hotel. And let me tell you something, they do not want you inside of a hotel, because I mean, the amount of people you're annoying is like hundreds of people. And if they think you're going to come back, forget about it. I mean, I think it's a great strategy, and something to consider, when choosing a target of any kind. Yeah, the Millennium campaign, I mean, they stopped sponsoring the Iditarod not too long after that. I remember somebody else had a protest planned, and they didn't even get to launch the protest because the announcement came. So yeah, I mean, I think that's a genius idea, and I hope that keeps working out for you. I want to bring Jeff in next, and for those of you watching on YouTube, yeah, Jeff is just kind of like a disembodied voice right now, because he has a photo here in Zoom, but for some reason, like, YouTube won't bring the photo on when he's speaking. I don't know why that is, but when you hear somebody speaking and none of our mouths are moving, it's Jeff. So Jeff, if you could, Jeff has been doing some anti-foie gras work in the Asheville, North Carolina area, and has been having some great success, not only with that, but with some anti-fur stuff as well. But yeah, Jeff, take it away. What's been going on in Asheville?
Well, Asheville is this really kind of hippie town in Western North Carolina in the mountains. It's always been sort of looked at as a very progressive place, compassionate place. It's very diverse in terms of like being very pro LGBT, pro women's rights. So, we have this sort of mantra, or I guess you might say, in Asheville, where, we're a compassionate community. But we have this blind spot when it comes to animals, because you have a lot of like humane meat, stuff like that. And I've started to notice this over the years. Asheville does have tons of animal lovers, And what's great about that is there's a huge community of people who kind of like are like watchdogs. You know, they like their eyes and ears are looking out for these types of things. So if something like fur or foie gras is in the community, a lot of times it kind of gets mentioned and people start talking about it. So really, what people in Nashville just were lacking as of a few years ago, I believe, due to COVID, was just sort of the community and the drive to start focusing on some of these things. And I'm not sure the history of pressure campaigning in Nashville, but to my understanding, it's somewhat recent, at least in the recent history. So basically, there was like, there was the kindling and it just needed a fire. Um, and what happened was there was a store in Nashville, right downtown, um, that was had fur coats in their window. And this was a small fur store. I mean, a small store that mainly sold other things and had fur there. Um, so you might say that that was like a pretty soft target of in terms of like we can go to this business and tell them, look, like Asheville is this compassionate place and we don't want fur here. We don't want animal abuse here. Your business does not ride on the selling of these fur coats. You're selling a lot of other things, including like vegan items, stuff like that for the home. So activists got together and did one protest and did some outreach to the store. And within a few months, the store went from, we don't need to listen to you to we don't support factory farms for fur, which was their statement, which I believe was some might say that they were leaving themselves wiggle room to get fur from other places, but I think it was just based on sort of an ignorance of how fur is produced. So anyway, there's a win right off the bat. And from there, we started to look around and say, who else is selling fur? Um, we found that there was a fur seller coming into town and using hotel. Um, and so we got to work. The activists showed up and let their voices, exercise their First Amendment rights and said, again, we don't want this here in Asheville. I believe in Asheville, you can utilize this sort of like territorial strategy of like, we don't want this here. I don't know if that works in every community, but in Asheville, I believe Asheville is a fairly unique place in that you can utilize that. So that's what happened with that. That ended up being kind of a tough win. It took a few months, but it got done. And then from there, in discussion with, a lot of people who know uh, how to do pressure campaigning, decision was made to look around for foie gras, and foie gras was located in about 5 restaurants in seasonable menus, and I believe only 2 restaurants were currently serving it, 2 or 3. One protest was done at one of the foie gras places, and they instantly took it off the menu. Um, that was followed by a restaurant who had close ties to that restaurant. One email was sent to them saying, hey, this restaurant did this. They responded and said, oh, well, we like that owner. If he did that, we'll do that. And then from there, someone in a very prominent business in Asheville was contacted with one phone call and said, hey, look, you're selling foie gras and you're sort of being discussed, by activists. And to this business's credit, and I guess I won't name them at this time, but to this business's credit, they jumped right on it, got on the ball, and within 2 days, they had taken it off their menu throughout their entire business operation, which was very significant. So that was 5 really quick wins, and that was based on sort of like an evolving strategy of going after, sort of the pillars of speciesism rather than speciesism as a whole, as it's been described. Chipping away where progress can be made, and making Asheville specifically a much more community that's in line with their sort of, MO of being a compassionate place.
That is super inspiring. The fact that, you know, most of these foie gras selling businesses have dropped with a minimal amount of protests. Some of the restaurants not requiring a single protest, simply, you know, being discussed as a target, finding out they're being discussed as a target and not wanting to have to deal with that. Because I'm assuming that the activists' reputation precedes them. You know, that's wonderful. It reminds me, I know there were some Miami activists. I can't remember what it was. I think it might have been like pony rides. There was some like public event with some pony rides or something like that. And one of the activists emailed the mayor. Forgive me if I'm getting the story a little bit wrong, but the general point will be the same. It said like, hey, we don't want these pony rides. This is exploitation. We shouldn't be doing this. And the mayor was like, yeah, you're right. And that was it. Like there no protest needed. So I think it's important to give businesses a chance to get informed, and whether they're making the choice because they realize the product's cruel, or whether they're making the choice because they don't want to have to deal with the protest, you know, it doesn't really matter. But yeah, maybe give them a you know, give them a chance before you rally the troops, so to speak, and see what happens, because you might be able to exert your energy toward something else if a simple email or chat will suffice. Yeah, I mean, that's amazing. So yeah, I want to bring it over to Lauren and Mark and talk about DC a little bit. So there's a campaign going on in DC. They have not gone foie gras free yet, but there's like a major storyline here that I think is super important for people to know about and learn from, and sort of, yeah, see like what can happen during a pressure campaign and sort of how to fight back. So if one of you wants to take it away on that story, yeah, we would love to hear about that.
I'll do the setup and I'll kick the fun part over to you, Mark. So we chose a restaurant target. It was 2 restaurants in one building to protest foie gras. They sold foie gras 9 out of the 12 months last year, or the year before we started protesting. And we began doing an email and phone campaign in January with the goal of being on the ground protests on Valentine's Day, which was their biggest day of business. And we ended up doing 1 in-person protest before Valentine's Day. And we can discuss all of this because you'll find out this is all public. But we did disruptions inside the restaurant. On February 10th was our first disruption. And then we did another protest on Valentine's Day. And from there, we were protesting between 2 and 5 times per week at their restaurant. Some weeks we would get all of their business hours covered, and we would basically be just doing chalking outside, chanting outside, and yelling at the customers. And our campaign kind of had a fun twist. So I'll pop it over to Mark. Oh, and I want to give a caveat. This thing that happened to us is extremely rare. It just doesn't happen very often. We are dealing with our particular curmudgeon of a business owner who has gone through a protest campaign before because he said the N-word to a coworker. He's a real jerk, and this is not common. Okay.
Yeah, so the campaign seemed to be going okay. We were getting a lot of police presence. He was definitely pretty upset about it. But the police weren't doing anything about it, really. I mean, it was our right to do it. And actually, at one point, he locked us in the restaurant when we were protesting in there. We were asking to leave. He refused to let us out. So it was actually the police who released us from the restaurant. But anyway, he seemed committed to using the legal system, though, and At the end of March, myself, Lauren, and another activist got served with paperwork outside the restaurant claiming that we were stalking and harassing them. We were being taken to domestic violence court, despite obviously no violence having occurred, at least not from us. And then they were also saying that we would need to pay their lawyer bills. We were obviously panicking at this point. We did find out afterwards it was not normal that someone would actually pay legal fees in this situation. So the worst we were actually looking at was probably a restraining order. At the time, we weren't really aware of that because they were putting a lot of, threatening language on there. And the paperwork they put together was just absolutely riddled with like some direct lies. And eventually we were able to get some incredible counsel. We kind of did a panic reach out to Bonnie Clapper, an amazing attorney in New York City. She's not a civil litigator though, and this was a civil case. So she helped us get other counsel, and they brought in Matthew Strugar, Nigel Barella, and Chris Carraway, three just absolutely incredible attorneys who represented us essentially on contingency. And they put together an anti-SLAPP motion. And I think this is something that's kind of important to know about. Basically, it's a motion that is claiming a case against us is just an attempt to silence public speech, essentially, on an issue of importance to the public. And it's a motion to dismiss the original case and for our legal fees to then be paid. And this is something that we have in DC. It's in a number of states. It is not in every state. So it is kind of good to know maybe if your state has that or not. But ultimately, our motion was successful. And so the case was dismissed. It has since been appealed, and our opposition has brought in Paul Clement's legal firm. Paul Clement was George Bush's Solicitor General and has argued more Supreme Court cases than anyone in history, unfortunately. But we're still feeling confident that we're going to get a win here, and our lawyers are pretty confident. So I will say that while this was a pretty stressful experience, the community is there and people do come through. Don't be stupid, but know what the laws are, make sure you're within them. And I think another thing that we learned was document everything, because I think that we would have lost hands down if we didn't have an incredible number of videos, recordings of phone calls, recordings of conversations that really directly contradicted the narrative our opponent was putting out there. I think if it was just our word versus his, with some things that were true, we did call the business. I'm sure he had records of that. Some of these things, I think we probably would have lost it. So we were very fortunate that we had a lot of video recording and a lot of recorded phone calls to go after that. So anyway, we're in appeals court for the next probably year or so. And that's kind of our situation. And then they're going to probably owe our lawyers a massive amount of money, which is kind of funny. Our lawyers are currently up to about $250,000. And we expect his lawyers have probably charged him something similar. So at the moment, he's probably about $500,000. Maybe he'll be at $1 million total when all this is done. I can't understand why he would do this personally. He's also claimed in his documents and in conversations with us that he's lost hundreds of thousands of dollars to our protests, that the majority of his staff quit. I think that he is exaggerating things very strongly, but I mean, maybe so, you never know. So he hasn't sold foie gras now for a while. Our ask was that he commit to never sell it again, given that he sold it for 7 years pretty consistently. But I don't know, maybe this is not the time to get into it, but it has raised, I think, questions, for Lauren, myself, and others about maybe if it would have been better to have the ask just take it off your menu as opposed to signing some kind of a commitment, because that seemed to be what he was really opposed to doing, and we would have won a while ago if our ask was just have it pulled off the menu temporarily, at least.
He pulled it off the menu after our very first protest.
Yeah.
So if you're looking for easy wins, I think that it's an easier win to say pull it off your menu It's good to note that foie gras is a seasonal food, so it's usually sold during the winter. But it's someplace in Florida, was it Miami, got like 3 or 4 restaurants to take it off their menu.
Orlando, I believe.
Okay, Orlando, and then you can police them afterwards. I'm of the opinion that that would have been a better strategic move on our part.
Yeah, I think that's been a debate amongst a lot of people. Before we move on, a few quick housekeeping notes. A, none of us are attorneys that I know of, so none of this stuff is legal advice. And B, Mark was mentioning like phone call recordings. This is legal in some places and not legal in other places. Some states only require what is it? One of the states, the one party consent, and some require 2-party consent. So before you go recording phone calls, you should look up what the laws are if you want to abide by the law.
You should also look up your neighboring state, because oftentimes neighboring states aren't the same. So if you go into the state nearby you every day anyway, like just make your calls from that state.
There you go. Good point. But yeah, I think that the strategy of like, hey, what do we want to ask is something that people have been talking quite a lot about. And I really understand both sides, but yeah, I mean, I don't know, maybe if they're just willing to pull it off, maybe you can kind of enforce that later on. Some would disagree. I see a side, I see what both sides are kind of saying on that. I guess I'm kind of sitting on the fence on this one. But yeah, I mean, one thing I want to point out is, there's so many different ways to win. And even though this restaurant in DC has not announced a foie gras free policy, they've pulled it off the menu. So that in itself is a win. And also, I think that it sends a message that other people in your community will take note of, which is, this guy messed around with these anti-foie gras activists, and now he's got $500,000 or so, or however much it is, in legal fees, because I mean, like, is it worth it? Like, is it worth it to deal with these people? And that's part of what it's about. And it kind of goes back to what Jeff was talking about in Asheville. It only took an email for some of these companies or a quick chat. And I think that's because now they know that if we're a target, we're going to have to deal with these people, and it's simply not worth it, especially with foie gras. I mean, there aren't too many restaurants that are nothing but foie gras or very prominently foie gras. Most of the time it's one menu item at a steakhouse or some other kind of restaurant like that. So is it really worth it over this one little item? And I think that was kind of brought into play as well in Austin with one of the targets that was in Austin. Like, all they had on their menu was foie gras mayo. It wasn't even like a plate of foie gras. It was just foie gras mixed into the mayonnaise. And that's why y'all picked that target, right? Can you talk a little bit about that, Pete?
Yeah, they played hardball too on that mayonnaise. It's like we would have loved to have been there just to protest the non-vegan mayonnaise, but especially since it had diseased duck liver in it, we had to be there. That one took a couple weeks and some real pressure, and that coincided with the Austin Animal Rights March. So there was like, I don't know, maybe I don't want to embellish, over 50 people, 60 people maybe. We marched, and we chose that restaurant as one of our destinations for the march through downtown. And they still, even with 50 people outside of the restaurant, just for mayo, they wouldn't drop it. But luckily it was next to some apartment complexes downtown. And I believe it was the pressure from the neighboring apartments that continued to discuss our protest with the owner. And eventually he made up a bunch of lies and said, well, I won't go into it, but he made up a bunch of stuff, I guess, to save face, and posted about it all over social media and said, for the safety of our staff and our neighboring community, we're going to drop the mayo. But I don't know. And going back, yeah, that was Orlando. Sorry to tangent back to something we already talked about. It was like, Jesus, like years ago now, I guess, right? My first foie gras adventure was with DXE Orlando, and it was just like Jeff was describing. It was another restaurant down the street. So I guess I'm saying this to say that it's important too to choose your targets as geographically located next to maybe your third target or fourth, the next target. Because when we got a win at this one restaurant, and we just walked, it was a block and a half away, and we walked down to the other one, and the one that we just got a win at called ahead to the other one and said, look, we dropped it. And by the time we got there, they're like, we don't want any, we're taking it off. We heard they just dropped it. It's not worth, for us to keep it on the menu. It doesn't make dollars and cents. So it doesn't make sense for us to keep it on the menu. So we're dropping it. Yeah. And I don't know, I could pivot onto something else, but I won't do that and mess things up. Go ahead, Trey.
No, that's all right. So we got something in the comments here talking about alternatives to foie gras that maybe restaurants could serve. So that's something that I haven't really seen a whole lot of in the campaigns. What are y'all's thoughts on that? Like, because I think, even though what am I trying to say here? Even if like some vegan restaurants had vegan foie gras, maybe would that be a good tactic? When customers are coming by, you say, hey, you can go eat vegan foie gras at this other place. Like, do you think that that could be another part of the strategy, is like encouraging other restaurants to serve faux gras instead of foie gras? Does anybody have thoughts about that?
I sense that the taboo is the product. I think that foie gras is cool and sexy because it's kind of like bad. That's my thoughts on it. Me and Mark had vegan foie gras like last month. So there is vegan foie gras. I just think that that's not what the customer base is after.
I don't know. I think there's definitely an element of that. I do think some people too are like I don't know what to call it, other than like foodies or people who like take pride in being a food snob or something, that have to eat like top so-called top of the line, fancy food or whatever. So maybe there's an element, that kind of element to it. Does anybody else have thoughts?
I think maybe depending on the restaurant you're going after as well. So if they're a restaurant that maybe has like a kind of a big part of their reputation, or at least the reputation they're trying to have being like kind of a sustainable or ethical brand, then they might be more open to doing something like a foie gras. You could probably guess based on their existing menu whether that's something they'll be open to or not. I think some places won't, but I actually do think it's a good idea for some places that you might say, hey, this could be kind of an innovative thing that you could put on your menu. And if they're already into the vegan alternatives, they might be into it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and just real quick, I was going to say there's a restaurant that it's not there anymore, but there used to be a restaurant near me, and I live in the South there, where I mean, the South does have a lot of vegan options, but just not where I'm at. And there was this one restaurant that was like an upscale type restaurant, and they had all these amazing vegan options, but they also had like some of these items like foie gras that I didn't even know about back at that time. And yeah, maybe like a restaurant like that that's selling foie gras but also selling vegan items, yeah, maybe that might be a strategy for them. What were you about to say, Pete?
Yeah, it's crazy. Uchi has like a huge, extensive vegan menu. I was gonna say, so us here in Austin, and I'm sure, I'm assuming the rest of you, and we already kind of touched on it. We usually send emails out first, or try to have a discussion, and send them a link to video footage, or educate them on the process of foie gras, the restaurants, so that they can hopefully maybe they didn't know, and they can make the compassionate choice before we start a campaign against them. Maybe it would be as easy as including, finding in your area, you do the groundwork for them, and find in your area a supplier of foie gras. And you could even, in that initial email or initial discussion, you could include that product, the foie gras. Hey, we do have, this alternative, and this is who supplies this area, and this is the cost per pound. Look at how much money you could save. You can include it right in the beginning, so that they have that information.
I want to move on to kind of a big picture type topic to see what you all think about this. I know, I haven't done too much of a deep dive into the foie gras industry, but I'm pretty sure there's like one major supplier, which is Hudson Valley in New York. And I think there's one other one that's like a pretty big player as well. I think it starts with an M. I can't remember the name of it. Do you know, Pete?
LaBelle. It's also in New York.
Oh, LaBelle. Okay, so they're both.
I think they're affiliated, though. I think they have the same
ownership. Oh, I thought there was one that starts with an M, but maybe they're not a player anymore. I don't really remember, but yeah, I mean, but at the same time, I know thousands of pounds of foie gras, probably tens of thousands, are being sold every year. So I mean, it's a lot coming out of this one or two businesses. There's a lot of business coming through. So I wanted to ask anybody who's maybe looked into the big picture and would be willing to answer or give their opinion, like, how close do you think we are to ending foie gras, like, period, at least in this country? Because I think foie gras is a lot bigger in Europe than it is here, I'm pretty sure. But yeah, in the United States, I think it's one of those issues that a lot of people, even if they're not vegan, even if they're not vegetarian, even if they're not like plant-based or something, they see the footage or they hear about what happens and they're against this. So do you think there's a possibility of, in the near future or semi-near future, of this industry completely coming to an end in this country? Does anybody have any thoughts?
Yeah, I think it's probably pretty near. I don't know if you guys have been following. I'm sure you guys have that. New York City has banned foie gras and is currently in a battle with New York State. So it's basically a battle between Mayor Eric Adams of New York City and Governor Kathy Hochul at the state level. So I think that there's a window for legislative action, possibly at the New York State level, but definitely in the Northeast, as far as getting foie gras bans. Maybe New York is the last to fall. Like, maybe New Jersey does it, maybe Massachusetts or whoever. I'm not sure how the legislative process works there. But in reading about that, I read a Politico article that said something, and I don't know if this is true, so don't quote me on it, but that Hudson Valley, about 30, 40, whatever it was, a huge chunk of their business goes directly to New York City. So if that New York City ban is allowed to take effect, which it hasn't yet because it's being litigated in the courts, um, they would lose a huge chunk of their business right there. So would they expand outward? Maybe, but that's where these grassroots campaigns of like getting individual restaurants across the various communities to stop selling foie gras comes in, because essentially, that number of places that are, that percentage that's going to New York City is going up with every foie gras place that stops selling foie gras. So I could definitely see foie gras being like one of the first major wins in terms of getting like I don't want to get ahead of myself. I tend to be glass half full sometimes when I shouldn't be, but maybe a nationwide ban is not out of the question maybe in the next decade or so. What do you guys think?
I think you're exactly right about that. California has also banned the sale of foie gras. And to speak to your New England point, Massachusetts has had 5 or 6 municipality bans on fur, 2 municipality bans on second generation anticoagulant rodenticide. So Massachusetts is a place where it's very attainable to get legislation done, especially at the municipality level. So at your town council or town meeting, I think that's definitely a possibility. I think it could be 20 years.
I think another thing that's significant here is that Hudson Valley is spending a large amount of money to fight things like bans. We suspect maybe even to fight things like activists. We may have our suspicions about who funds cases against us. And so if we are taking a chunk out of their profits, that could really significantly affect their ability to defend this stuff on the local, state, and federal level in a way that maybe just isn't true for a lot of other industries, right? Like the chicken industry is going to be richer than God for the foreseeable future, and taking a small chunk out of that isn't going to do that much in terms of their actual political power. But taking a big chunk out of their sales could really affect their ability to keep doing this.
Yeah, foie gras is not going to be tax subsidized as highly as, like, say, the dairy industry or whatever other industry. You can go after these smaller targets and this essentially one supplier, and it's not like their pockets are just going to keep getting filled. That's the difference there.
Yeah, I hope people are taking notes because what's being discussed right here can not only apply to foie gras, but any kind of thing that you're fighting. I mean, just in the past, 60 seconds, 90 seconds, we talked about the bottleneck of New York City and how, if most of the foie gras is being sold in New York City and there's a way to prevent foie gras from getting to New York City, whether it be legal, a legal battle or political battle or whatever it is, there's a tactic there. And then, Pete's point of, hey, this is an industry that's not going to be heavily subsidized because most people don't eat this stuff. It's not, it's not something that people eat every day, and it's a so-called luxury item. These things are things that we should be thinking about when, in my opinion, when we go after any kind of industry or any business. What are their vulnerabilities? Like, how can we actually make tangible change in this area? And I think the points that you all made in that last little segment are great. I'm on this website. I don't know how credible it is, so just take this with a grain of salt, but it looks like there are production bans on foie gras, according to finedininglovers.com, whatever that is. Argentina, Czech Republic, Denmark, Finland, Germany, Ireland, Israel, Italy, Luxembourg, the Netherlands, Norway, Poland, Sweden, Switzerland, and the United Kingdom. A total ban on sale and production in India. And then in California, I know there was like a thing where it was banned But then I think then they had a thing where like, okay, well, you can still like eat it in California, but you can't actually sell it here, or something. There's some kind of like technicality, but even if it's not a full outright ban, it makes it difficult for anybody to get foie gras in California. It just makes it a pain. So anything like that, I think, is a victory. So yeah, I mean, this is something that is all around the world being considered as cruel and inhumane. And building this consciousness, I think, is yeah, super important. I want to remind folks, if you have any questions, or if you want to just comment on anything that's been said, so that we know you're getting some valuable information here, and that you're taking it in, comment and let us know. Hannah said these expensive high-end specialties are made of not only horrific abuse, but extra unhealthy. Vegan alternatives are always good to support as they'll become more and more mainstream. And on a separate note, many trees come from one seed. Every ripple is a wave. A nationwide ban is bound to happen for sure. Thanks for everyone's work. And Ruda, I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing your name, Ruda, very informative. Thank you. So yeah, people are getting something out of this, and I agree with Hannah's sentiment that this is causing a ripple effect, because I know I think the first foie gras stuff that I had heard about was the stuff in Orlando, where like these multiple restaurants, like in one night, over like a marching type protest, had dropped foie gras. And I'm thinking, like, why isn't everybody doing this? You know what I mean? Let's wipe foie gras out of here. And yeah, then some more people started like hopping on, and I think it's just been so great. And I feel like everybody, there's overlap, but everybody's kind of like fighting in different ways and winning in different ways. And I think most of the people in this chat are have been going kind of the pressure campaign route, and with some of you the legal route, by force kind of. But yeah, I mean, there's people outside of this chat that are doing like legal battles and political battles, and things like that. And I think all that is great. Ash Wickedy says, excellent discussion. I appreciate all of you. We appreciate you and all the work you do, and for joining us for this chat. Is there anything anybody else wants to add to this? I know we've been rocking and rolling for about an hour now, but yeah, does anybody have anything else they want to bring up?
I want to go ahead, Lauren.
Oh, okay. I'd like to just plug, if anyone's paying attention to the EATS Act, or any opposition to overturn Prop 12, that will overturn every municipality ban of foie gras, every statewide ban of foie gras. So definitely call your representative and say that you oppose any attempt to overturn Proposition 12, and that's federal.
Yes, I'm sure many of you have gotten information about the EATS Act in your inboxes. But yeah, the thing to do there is to contact your representatives and raise a fuss, because that absolutely would be horrible for so many reasons. Go ahead, Pete.
Can you drop any kind of info about that, or like a link or something in the comments?
Anybody know the best resource? I would have to dig through my email to.
I bet Mark has a resource. I can
or could
it.
One of you guys do a post on one of AAM's pages or something?
Yeah, maybe we can do that, and we can put it right here in the chat as well if somebody's got a resource for that.
Cool. But yeah, I wanted to hear from you guys if you thought, because I can see the nuance here, but if you thought that attacking the foie gras industry is a form of asking for diet change, because it's seen as this delicacy. So, you get someone to stop eating foie gras because of its obvious cruelty. It doesn't mean that they're gonna they're not going vegan necessarily because they're dropping foie gras from their diet. But as Mark brought up in the beginning, it was seeing animals being boiled alive that caused him to go down the route to go vegan. And it's sort of like, it reminds me of the meat your meat sort of campaign. If it's bringing attention to animals as someone and not something, which is what foie gras does. When someone's educated on the process of it, they consider these animals, they consider the suffering, and then maybe they start to think, it plants that seed, and they start to think about the other animals on their plate. So to me, I see it as a form of actions for diet change, and I wanted to get your guys' thoughts on that.
I'll take that because that kind of led into what I was going to talk about with just kind of recognizing that people are further along than we think. It's like really easy to get discouraged because almost everybody eats meat, almost everybody eats animal products. But when they are actually informed of how horrible these conditions are for animals, be they, geese in foie gras or ducks, whether they're animals for fur or and what I've experienced a lot too is like that meat eaters will often say that they're against factory farming without realizing that, like something like 99% of animals are factory farmed. So when people are actually really informed about these things, I just, I don't mean that they're going to go instantly vegan. I think that's unrealistic in some cases, not all cases, but it just goes to show that people do actually have concerns about animals. When you're not just looking at the troll comments on like a YouTube channel or whatever it is, or a Facebook page, most people really are against this kind of abuse. And and also I do want to say, like, regardless of the reasons for these restaurants taking foie gras off their menu, it should be noted that they've done the right thing. And some of them deserve, credit for, having change of heart, which is sometimes the case. And so, yeah, I do think it's a step on the way to not just like diet change, but like a complete change in how our world views animals and how they are used by society, or, like should not be used by society, obviously. But yeah, it's definitely a step there, and maybe a larger one than we realize.
Yeah, and who knows the ripple effect of that, like maybe a restaurant's considering putting octopus on the menu and they're like, man, these foie gras people, if we get as much flack as all the restaurants that are selling foie gras are getting over this, maybe restaurants are second guessing what they're putting on their menu when it comes to these so-called upscale items.
I find it really empowering that we can do these campaigns and not have to rely on people going vegan. I think that people respond to their environment. I just tried to look up the stat, but there was I saw a stat recently. It was promoting like cage-free eggs, and it was saying if eggs raised by $1 or whatever it is, 20% of people will stop eating eggs. So I'm all about just moving around the people that aren't there yet. I think if we change the environment, then they have no choice.
This is a little bit off topic, but I did want to throw in a bit of a plug. So we didn't really have the ability, for a variety of reasons, to go for legislative solutions here in DC. But I actually do think that is one of the most effective things you can do if you're in a larger area, or even not, because that's something where you can get everyone basically to stop selling foie gras. And in most situations, these are not large national or international chains doing it. It is mostly smaller businesses. Most of them are probably only in your city. The ones that are in your city selling foie gras, they probably don't have locations in others. There's obviously exceptions like Uchi, but the majority of them are this way. So getting a ban really like takes care of it completely. If that's something you can do, it does depend on the climate where you are. We were talking to some people about this, and they're like, this is they're in a major agricultural area that doesn't look kindly to that. So if you're in that kind of area, probably pressure campaigning is a better way to go. But I actually, despite being more of a pressure campaigner, I do think that the legislative approach is really good if you have that capability. Oh, also, shameless promotion. Trey has put it in the chat, but if you want to do something right now to help fight the EATS Act, there's a link there, act.mercyforanimals.org/EATS-Act. Because like Lauren said, really everything we do in terms of legislation on this or fur or any other farmed animal issue is dependent on the EATS Act not passing.
Hopefully that does not pass. It seems really bogus, but we need to all throw our weight behind that in case it has any chance whatsoever of passing. We all need to be contacting our representatives about that and spreading the word to other activists for sure. And to go back to what you were talking about earlier, Mark, I mean, yeah, I think victory just looks different for everybody. It's about what are your strengths as an activist. What's the environment that you're in? There's so many things to consider on top of, the things like we were talking about with Pete, like, is this place connected to a hotel and that makes them more vulnerable? There's so many factors that go into it, and there's not a one size fits all, and there's not an instruction manual to this. You really have to just be smart and be creative. And if you're considering launching a campaign, think these things through as far as you can to their logical conclusion, and make the most educated decision you can on who's a good target. And sometimes you might think it's easy and it's hard, and sometimes you might think it's hard and it's easy. Sometimes we just don't know, but all we can do is put in the most research we can, and then really put in the effort. I want to go around and let each of you speak about how people can get involved from where they are in any of the campaigns that you all have a hand in. We can start with Jeff. Jeff, is there a foie gras, anti-foie gras campaign currently going on in your area? And if there is there a way for people outside of Asheville to help with that?
That's a tricky question, because I try to keep specifics. Like, I try to be a little more vague about specific campaigns and that sort of thing. So I would say not currently, although, a lot of people have helped out on previous campaigns in Asheville from out of state by lending phone calls, like when we needed to do phone calls, pressure, that sort of thing. So I would say one thing though, and I did just want to jump in and say this, like, unrelated to Asheville, but this is related to any sort of like activism, is just to have the humility to listen to the people who have done it for a lot longer than you. Take as much advice as you can. I think that's the best way to go about things, is listen to the voices that you trust, and gather up all the wisdom, compile it, make the best decision out of that. Maybe you listen to some advice, maybe you don't listen to others, but you just be listening and be willing to learn and adapt. Because, like Trey mentioned, there's no guidepost, or, there's no instruction manual necessarily. It's because a lot of this stuff is new, but people have been doing it for years, and there's wisdom to glean from that. So that's all I'll say about that. But I don't have more specific about Asheville.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. Learn from those who have won in the past. Learn from the mistakes. Learn from the failures. Learn from anybody you can that you trust. I think that's great. I think that's great advice. And yeah, Jeff, if you could just let us know anytime you need help spreading the word on these things, and everybody can keep an eye on animal activism mentorships pages, and we will certainly promote any kind of calls to action that you have, and that goes for anybody watching as well. If you've got an anti-foie gras campaign going on, or maybe something else that we can help, with a call to action or something, let us know about that. Lauren, Mark, is there anything folks can do to help out the anti-foie gras movement in DC right now?
Yeah, we have digital actions coming up, regardless of where you are. So I'll post a link in the chat. You can either search for DC Coalition Against Foie Gras on Facebook, or just go to facebook.com/end foie gras, one word. I'll paste that link in the chat as well. But there's generally digital actions every month. And also, if we're definitely not the most qualified people to speak to it, but if there's anything we can do in terms of providing you signs or any kind of support for people who are looking to start campaigns or just want to chat about them, definitely just send us a message on that account, and we would love to chat.
Anything to add, Lauren, to that?
The publicly accessible number for Kinship is, which is a restaurant we're campaigning against, is 202-737-7706. I wouldn't encourage anybody to call them, but if you have anything on your mind and you're the type of person to do something like that, how could I stop you?
Yeah, some people might be inclined to give a polite call and just let them know about the cruelty of foie gras and ask them to stop. Pete?
Yeah, if you want to get started in your city and there's foie gras being served, you can email or call PETA. They'll provide you with free signs as well. That's another great resource. That's how we got started with ours. And PETA actually picked up on our campaign, and they did one of those call to actions where you can just type. If I wasn't doing this on my phone, I would open up another tab and find the specific number, but it's on PETA's website. I don't know if you can do it, Trey, if you have the capabilities now, but yeah, so you could, I don't know how many, like 15,000 signatures or more, maybe almost 20,000 signatures I think have already been signed from the PETA call to action, just asking Uchi to drop foie gras.
Are you talking about the action alerts?
Yeah, the PETA action alerts.
PETA action alerts. Okay, I'm gonna copy and paste the link for PETA action alerts.
Okay, that works.
Chat.
Yeah, and then we will continue along with new targets to come. I'm not going to name any others, but High Hospitality is the restaurant group that owns Uchi and Uchi Co. And you could possibly, sorry, Trey, I got you doing so much here. I don't have High Hospitality's number. And I would say, do not call High Hospitality. Do not call them, and, respectfully and kindly request that they have foie gras removed from all of their restaurants. But we will continue to protest outside of High Hospitality in Austin. We have that luxury of the restaurant group being right here on a busy street. So we'll continue to be out there, and I'd love your support. While we're standing on the sidewalk, I'd love your support through email or a phone call. But don't call them, please.
Yeah, so High Hospitality. I'm not finding a phone number.
That's HAI.
Yes, HAI Hospitality. I'm not finding a phone number off the cuff here. But folks can follow Austin Animal Advocates on Instagram, and you can look up High Hospitality, HAI Hospitality, and you can look up all about Chef Tyson Cole and Uchi and their partner businesses like Uchi Co, UCHIKO. and what's the other one? Loro, Loro, right?
Loro and Uchiba.
Uchiba. They have locations in Miami, Denver. That goes for Uchi has Miami and Denver, and then there's a Loro in Houston. And then there's there's some others as well that I think are opening up. So yeah, everybody check that out, and maybe drop them a kind word, just reminding them that foie gras is super cruel and they should drop it.
And if, sorry, one last thing, Trey, if any of the activists in Austin, Houston, Dallas, Miami, or Denver are short of any wind under their activism wings, there is, so I've heard, there's an activist in Austin that had a conversation with Chef Tyson Cole, the main chef for Uchi and Uchiko, and it was from what I heard, a long, like 1 hour kind and cordial conversation. And he said, you guys can continue to do it all over the country. Keep going. We will outlast you. So take that for what you will, and hopefully that's ammo for you to keep going.
Yeah. Something I want to point out to people before we go is, there was recently a win in Austin. I believe the name of the place was Dean's Italian Steakhouse. And there are two Dean's Italian Steakhouses, and one is in Charlotte, North Carolina, one is in Austin, Texas. So it's important when you're picking a target, like, hey, how many of these places are there? And it might be nice to start out with what you think might be the easiest and maybe work your way up to something that's a chain and has businesses elsewhere. But in this situation, there were only 2 restaurants, and so the Charlotte activists went after, or protested outside of Dean's in Charlotte, and the Austin folks protested outside in Austin, and the campaign was won in less than 24 hours, I believe, if I remember correctly. So sometimes it's about potentially reaching out to other people around the country who might be willing to support you in your cause, and kind of selling that campaign to them as well, and finding other dedicated people who'd be willing to lock in on a campaign elsewhere. So that's something else to consider. We can work together to make these things happen, or sometimes there might be a secondary or a tertiary target in other places, and you might just let activists in that area say, hey, just so you know, this place is in your area, and it would help our campaign, maybe just point it out. So this has been a great discussion. I want to thank Jeff from Asheville, Lauren and Mark from DC, and Pete from Austin, Texas, for joining this discussion. There are so many people outside of this chat that are fighting the foie gras industry around the country and around the world. We couldn't have them all on, but I hope that you will follow these campaigns. I hope you'll support these campaigns. Animal Activism Mentorship will certainly post calls to action when we can, to keep everybody informed on what they can do to end this horrific industry and get some wins along the way to that total liberation of these ducks that are suffering in this industry. So I hope that you all learned something. We're gonna try to do more discussions like this about different topics on this channel. So I hope that you will subscribe. I hope that you'll hit the notification bell. We're pretty close to being able to monetize this channel. If we're able to do that, we're going to put the money toward, being able to do events and just keep AAM going and things like that. So spread the word about the channel, tell your friends, have them subscribe, have them watch, or have them click the notification bell. Check out our many amazing workshops that we have from different folks, and discussions and other inspiring content that's on here. Thank you so much again to our guests for being here, and We will see you on the next one. Keep doing your thing out there, everybody. It's going to take all of us to achieve animal liberation, so keep at it. Peace.